Hello YouTube, and welcome to another Elder Scrolls lore video, this time on the Immortal Marmor King Orgnum. I've already touched on Orgnum briefly in some of my previous videos and even in some of my lore lectures. However, I've never really dedicated a video to himself and all there's to know about him, so let's change that today. So, this video contains some assumptions based on lore that we know, and at the end I even have some slight theories for you. But before I can present those, we will have to go over what confirmed history and in-game rumors that we have. Orgnum's story starts in the early Meretic era, on the mythical continent of Aldmeris. Here, the elven precursor race, the Aldmer, lived in very traditional and religious societies that had expanded itself across the entire continent, until basically all of the land of Aldmeris was one big city, where according to the sources that we have, almost no nature remained. It was here on Aldmeris where Orgnum's story really begins. He was a nobleman, who according to the legends was phenomenally rich. Using his wealth, he garnered followers and funded a large-scale rebellion against the rulers of Aldmeris, presumably in an attempt to overthrow the ruling powers. However, this insurrection failed, and it resulted in him and his followers being rounded up and banished from the continent of Aldmeris to a place far away. This place, Pyandonea, was separated from Aldmeris by an impenetrable veil of mist. The continent of Pyandonea was also filled with marshes and surrounded by sea that was filled with monsters and serpents. However, even though the hardships, Orgnum and his followers built a new society that overcame the hardships of the land and even tamed the sea serpents and used them as mounts of war and even used them for transportation and for guarding. Over the ages their race changed, evolved to adapt their new homeland, eventually becoming the grey-skinned Marmor or sea elves that we know today. However, as they evolved away from their Aldmeri brethren, they never quite forgave the Aldmer for banishing them from Aldmeris. And throughout history they have raided the Somerset Isles countless times and even attempted to conquer it multiple times, so to wrest it from Aldmer control, or the High Elves, who were considered closest to the Aldmer, and whom they despised for being so close to the Aldmer, who they never forgave for banishing them. However, as the years passed, presumably much in their society changed, but there was one thing that did not change: their leader. The immortal King Orgnum, who not only seemed to be immortal, but also seemed to get more youthful every century. King Orgnum himself led multiple raids and military campaigns against the Somerset Isles, never quite succeeding in his goal of capturing it. Maybe because of his constant failures, and the loyalty of his subjects was beginning to wane, as we know that over the years groups of Marmor split themselves off from their kin. However, by far the most groups remained loyal to King Orgnum over the centuries, allowing him to continue ruling over Pyandonea and try to conquer Tamriel and the Somerset Isles. We know that during his rule he underheld foreign relations with at least the province of Elsewhere, as in the Elder Scrolls Online we can find a Marmor embassy on the island of Canarthis Roost south of Elsewhere. We also know that he underheld some form of communications, whether those were complete diplomatic ties, we don't know, but he underheld communications with Akavir, as later a royal Marmor translator declared that next to ancient Nordic and Tamrielic, he also knew the languages of Akavir, and sometimes had to use these languages during diplomatic missions. During the period of Elder Scrolls Online, we know that Orgnum used the Discord on Tamriel to weaken the Aldmeri dominion by sending Sea Viper squads to attack many of its territories, and he used diplomatic methods like the embassy that I mentioned before, to try and damage the Dominion. For most of the first and second era, this is basically what he did, using small forces and diplomatic means to make life harder for the High Elves. Eventually he even managed to get some foothold in southwest of Tamriel, where some small Marmor villages and forts were established until they got eventually eliminated by the Colovians. The last things that we ever heard from Orgnum and the Marmor was during the third era in the year 110, when he and Potema, the Wolf Queen, planned to take over all of Tamriel, making the continent a sort of vassal state to Pyandonea under the rule of Empress Potema. He apparently met with and slept with Potema during this meeting, whom he found a great beauty apparently. He even used some strange herbs, or read drugs, with Potema that heightened her pleasure during the lovemaking, but other than him banging Potema, we actually learned some more about him as a person during this documented encounter, like that he is pretty reserved, and like for example that he, like the rest of the Marmor, has blank eyes, which I personally found very curious, as it isn't further explained why he has blank eyes, as he is supposed to be an Altmer. So unless he himself evolved over the years, as in his body evolved over the years, there isn't really any reason for his eyes to be blank, but I will get to that in a bit, as there is a theory on it. After this meeting with Potema, it was agreed that the Marmor would invade Tamriel, as Potema would lead an insurrection against the sitting emperor. However, the invasion by the Pyandonians failed horribly, as their fleet was decimated by the combined might of the Empire, Somerset Isles and the Sigic Order. After this, we haven't heard a thing of the Marmor, or King Orgnum for that matter. Some people assume that he died during the battle, but others think that he survived and that he's merely biding his time. However, I have a more interesting and maybe a little bit far-fetched theory. You see, in the Elder Scrolls universe we have an artifact named Orgnum's Coffer. It's a coffer that fills itself with gold every day for the wielder. This artifact appeared in the Elder Scrolls Arena and had the description that when Orgnum possessed it back in the Meretic era, the supply of gold was not daily, rather it was limitless. My assumption, which I think I can safely make, is that this very artifact is the cause for Orgnum's incredible wealth while on Altmeris. However, something that is very curious about this artifact is its origin. For one, we know that the artifact disappears after a good while of spewing money. This leads me to believe that this artifact is in fact a Daedric artifact, as many others have assumed as well, due to its disappearances. And many redditors have assumed that if this is a Daedric artifact, it's probably an artifact from Clavicus Vial. Now, what I'm gonna assume next is highly speculative and it cannot really be taken as fact. But it's interesting to think about at least for me. I personally think that this artifact, in getting it, Orgnum also paid a price to the Daedric Prince. I think that he received it as an old Altmeri nobleman, and then he got cursed by Clavicus Vial to very slowly get younger and younger every moment instead of older. This would explain the statement that he seemed to get younger every century, and it might explain why we haven't seen him around since the Third Era. Maybe he has regressed so far in age that he could no longer get a hold of his empire. Maybe he's a baby now. I mean, who knows? I mean, that would be a bit fast, but maybe a teenager. Now, this is just me connecting a couple of people's theories that I found online, and after reading them, this somehow seemed very logical to me to bind the theories in this way. But do keep in mind that it's just one of the many theories surrounding him, and that it's far from confirmed. As in, it isn't. It's not canon at all. It's just a theory. Another popular theory about Orgnum's immortality is that he possesses different bodies throughout the centuries, meaning that after a couple of hundred years, when the body he uses becomes old and feeble, he just switches to a younger body. This has been speculated as we have examples of Marmor wizards occupying bodies this way, and it would explain the statement that he gets younger every century, as he literally just gets a younger body every century or so. This would make more sense than my theory, as it has more ground. However, I just like my theory more. In the end, neither of them are confirmed. Finally, there's an in-universe statement that he might be the serpent god of the Red Guards, as he tames sea serpents and uses them for guards and mounts. However, the source of this claim has a very dubious track record, which is why I mention it last, even though it's unofficial material. As the writer, or at least the in-universe writer, of this piece has a very bad case of the unreliable narrator problem. So we don't know if we can actually trust this statement. But in this case, it would explain his immortality, as he's basically a divine. That said, this is about all that we know of Orgnum. It's not too much, but I really like his character, as the immortal king of the Marmor. That said, if you like this video, consider sticking around for more Elder Scrolls lore content next Thursday, or consider watching some of my previous videos on the Elder Scrolls lore. I basically have a whole catalog of them at this point, and well, you should just check them out. I even made some more videos on Pyandonea, on Altmeris, on the lore lectures of the Meretic era, in which all of them Orgnum appears. And if you thought that I skimmed over some things like the war too quickly in this video, that's basically because I already covered them all in that video. So go check it out. That said, allow me to vocally thank my top patrons Bernardo Binda, Metalloid1v1, Hayden Barnes and Gabriel Binda. You guys, along with the other people here on screen, are the absolute best and make it so that I can keep making these videos every week. That said, it's time for me to sign off, as I will see all of you next week with a new Elder Scrolls lore video. Bye bye.